I died at 73, standing in a bathroom mirror that reflected back 55 years of compromise. The woman staring back at me had hollow eyes and hands that trembled not from age, but from a lifetime of holding back words that should have been screamed. That night was our golden anniversary. 50 years. Half a century of being the perfect wife, the dutiful mother, the woman who disappeared so slowly that even I forgot I had ever existed. The party was beautiful. Everyone said so. White roses everywhere, just like our wedding day. The same photographer we'd hired decades ago, now gray-haired and bent, capturing moments that looked like joy from the outside. But I stood in that crowd of well-wishers and felt like a ghost haunting my own life. When they asked me to give a speech about our enduring love, I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I was emotional, but because there was nothing left to say. He filled the silence, of course. He always did. Talked about patience, about how marriage was about finding the right woman and teaching her how to love properly. The room laughed. They thought it was charming. I thought about the pills in my purse. But instead of dying that night, I woke up 18 years old, in a body that remembered how to dream. The morning sun felt different on skin that hadn't yet learned to flinch. My hands were smooth, unmarked by years of scrubbing floors and swallowing silence. When I looked in the mirror, I saw her again, the girl I used to be, before I learned that love was supposed to hurt Dada first. I thought it was a gift, a chance to do things differently, to make better choices. But as the days passed and memories settled like sediment in still water, I realized this wasn't about changing the past. This was about understanding it. I remembered everything, every small cruelty disguised as care, every dream I'd abandoned because he needed me more. Every time I'd made myself smaller to fit into the shape he'd drawn around me, the way he'd smile, when I gave up something I loved, as if my sacrifice was proof of his worth. How he'd trained me, so gently, so gradually, to believe that my voice was too loud, my dreams too selfish, my needs too much. But I also remembered the girl I'd been before him, the one who wanted to build things, to create, to leave something meaningful behind. The one who believed she could change the world, one small act at a time. I'd wanted to work with recycling, with sustainability, taking broken things and giving them new life. Funny how prophetic that seems now. The day I saw him again, I was sitting in a coffee shop near campus, sketching designs for a solar panel installation. My hands moved across the paper with confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. When the shadow fell across my table, I looked up into eyes I knew too well. He was 18 too, beautiful in that dangerous way that makes smart girls stupid. But this time, I saw past the surface. I saw the calculation behind his smile, the way he positioned himself to catch the light just so, the practiced casualness of his approach. "You're in my environmental science class," he said, settling into the chair across from me without invitation. Just like he had 55 years ago. The same words, the same smile, the same assumption that my space belonged to him. "I know," I said. He'd expected me to flutter, to blush, to be grateful for his attention. Instead, I kept drawing. I watched confusion flicker across his features, just for a moment, before the charm reasserted itself. "Interesting project," he said, leaning closer to look at my sketches. "Very ambitious." The word was a knife wrapped in silk. I'd heard it before, in another lifetime, when I tried to explain my dreams to him. Ambitious, too big for someone like you, too complicated. Why don't you focus on something more practical, more suitable? Yes, I agreed, not looking up. It is. We began dating again. Or rather, he began the same careful campaign of possession he'd waged the first time, and I let him think he was winning. I went to dinners where he ordered for me, smiling as he chose dishes I didn't want. I listened to him explain my own field of study to me, nodding as if his shallow understanding was profound wisdom. I let him slowly, subtly discourage my friendships, my interests, my independence. But this time, I was documenting it all. Every small manipulation, every calculated kindness that came with invisible strings attached, the way he'd offered to help with my projects, then subtly redirect them toward his vision. How he'd praise me for being low maintenance when I stopped expressing preferences, mature when I stopped arguing with his decisions, perfect when I stopped being myself entirely. I played the role he'd trained me for, but this time I was conscious of every line. And slowly, carefully, I began to plan my exit. The thing about being reborn into your own life is that you know exactly how the story ends. I knew that if I stayed, I'd wake up 30 years from now in a house that felt like a museum of someone else's dreams. I'd have a son who barely spoke to me because I'd taught him through my silence that women existed to serve. I'd spent decades watering a garden of resentment, watching it bloom into the kind of marriage that strangers admire and wives endure. But I also knew something else, something that changed everything. I wasn't the only one who remembered. I saw it in his eyes one evening, 3 months into our renewed courtship. We were at dinner, the same restaurant where he'd proposed the first time, and he was talking about our future with a certainty that went beyond typical young love. He spoke about our wedding, our home, our children, all in specific detail. That matched memories I thought were mine alone. You remember too, I said quietly, interrupting his monologue about the house he wanted to buy. He went very still for a moment. The mask slipped completely, and I saw something desperate and hungry in his expression. I remember everything, he said finally. Every day, every year. The way you used to look at me like I hung the stars. The way you trusted me completely. The way you loved me. The way I disappeared. I added, "You were perfect," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "You were everything I needed you to be." Yes, I agreed. I was. He reached across the table, his fingers finding mine. "We can do it right this time. Better. I'll be more careful with you. More careful. Not kinder. Not more respectful. More careful." Like I was a delicate object that had broken under his handling, rather than a person who'd been slowly erased. "I know you will," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "But I won't be there for you to practice on." That night, I went home and wrote 2 letters. The first was for him. I wrote it by hand, in the careful script my mother had taught me before she'd learned to keep her own thoughts to herself. I told him that I remembered everything, the good and the terrible, the subtle cruelties and the outright dismissals. I thanked him for teaching me the difference between love and possession, between partnership and performance. I explained that I understood, now, that he couldn't help himself, that he'd learned to love like a man who hoards beautiful things, keeping them in glass cases where they can't be touched or changed or lost. I told him I forgave him for not knowing how to love without consuming. But I also told him that forgiveness didn't mean repetition, that understanding didn't mean acceptance, that I wished him well. But I would not be the woman who saved him from himself by sacrificing herself on the altar of his becoming. The second letter was harder to write. It was addressed to the girl I'd been, the one who'd believed that love meant making yourself smaller. That kindness meant swallowing pain. That a good woman was one who never said no. I wrote to her about worthiness, about the difference between compromise and capitulation. I told her that her dreams weren't selfish. Her voice wasn't too loud. Her needs weren't too much. I told her that she deserved to be loved for who she was, not shaped into who someone else needed her to be. I told her I was sorry it had taken me 73 years to learn these things. I told her I forgave her for not knowing better. I told her that love, real love, was supposed to make you more yourself, not less. When I finished writing, I felt something shift inside me, like a door that had been locked for decades finally opening. The next morning, I found him waiting outside my apartment. He looked terrible, sleepless, desperate. younger than his 18 years. He'd always been beautiful when he was vulnerable. It was part of his power. "Don't do this," he said before I could speak. "Whatever you're planning, don't do this. We belong together. We always have." I handed him the letters. "Both of them. The first one is for you," I said gently. "The second one is for me, but I think you should read them both." His hands shook as he took the envelopes. "And then what?" "And then nothing. I'm leaving." "Where will you go?" I smiled then, and it felt like the first genuine expression I'd worn in his presence in either lifetime. Everywhere I was supposed to go before. I left that afternoon. Not dramatically, not in anger, but quietly, like water finding its own level. I transferred to a university across the country, one with an excellent environmental engineering program. I changed my phone number, my email, my entire digital footprint. I became unreachable, unfindable, ungoogleable. For the first time in my life, I disappeared by choice. The years that followed were strange and wonderful. I threw myself into my studies with the focused intensity of someone, making up for lost time. I discovered that my mind, freed from the constant work of managing someone else's emotions, was capable of extraordinary things. I invented new processes for breaking down electronic waste, developed patents for solar panel recycling, founded a company built on the radical idea that nothing is truly broken beyond repair. I made friends, real ones, who knew my thoughts and opinions and liked me for them. I traveled to conferences, gave presentations, won awards. I dated, sometimes, but carefully. I learned to recognize the signs of a man who loved the idea of me rather than the reality. I developed an allergy to charm without substance, to promises that came with invisible contracts. 5 years after I left, I met Ethan at a sustainability summit in Portland. He was a quiet man who worked with urban farming initiatives, teaching communities how to grow food in small spaces. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to my answers without trying to improve them. When he disagreed with me, he said so directly, without trying to make me feel foolish for having the wrong opinion. When I accomplished something, he celebrated, without taking credit for inspiring me. It took me 2 years to trust that his kindness wasn't a strategy, that his respect wasn't a temporary performance designed to win me over, that when he said he loved me, he meant the person I actually was, not the person he thought he could turn me into. We married on a Tuesday in a courthouse, wearing comfortable clothes and genuine smiles. My company was thriving. His nonprofit was expanding into 3 new cities. We were both whole people who'd chosen to share our lives, rather than broken pieces trying to complete each other. I thought about my other life sometimes, the long marriage, the dutiful silences, the slow erosion of self. I wondered if he'd remarried, if he'd found another woman to shape into his perfect companion. I hoped he'd learned something from my letters, but I didn't need to know. My healing didn't depend on his transformation. But 10 years after I left, I learned that he hadn't moved on at all. A former classmate found me through my company's website. She was excited to reconnect, full of news about people I barely remembered. But then she mentioned him. "You probably heard about David," she said casually. "So tragic. Really? He never got over you leaving like that." I hadn't heard. I'd made sure of that. "He kept those letters you gave him," she continued. "Carried them everywhere. Sarah Martinez, you remember Sarah from sophomore year? She said she tried dating him a few years after you left, but it was like dating a ghost. He'd talk about you like you were dead. Like he was mourning this great love that had been taken from him." She paused, perhaps sensing my discomfort. "He never married, never really dated seriously. Just waited, I guess. Like he thought you might come back. Sarah said he'd show people the letters sometimes when he was drunk. Said they were the most beautiful thing anyone had ever written, but also the cruelest. Said you destroyed him with kindness." After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, Ethan found me there when he got home from work, and I told him everything about the first life, the rebirth, the letters, the decade of silence I'd wrapped around myself like armor. Do you feel guilty? He asked when I finished. I considered this carefully. No, I said finally, but I feel sad for both of us, really, for the people we were in that first life and for the person he chose to become in this one. You couldn't save him from himself. Ethan said gently, I know, but I think part of me hoped the letters would free him too. Instead, he turned them into another cage. That night, I dreamed about the girl I'd been at 18, both times. In the dream, she was standing at a crossroads, holding to maps. One led to a beautiful house with locked doors and windows that never opened. The other led to a path that disappeared into forest. Destination unknown. In my first life, I'd chosen the house. Safety, certainty, someone else's dreams. In my second life, I'd chosen the path. Risk, possibility, my own becoming. In the dream, she looked at me with young eyes full of questions. Which one is right? She asked. The one that lets you keep being you, I answered. I woke up feeling lighter somehow, as if I'd finally forgiven myself for taking so long to learn how to choose myself. The story could end there, with me peaceful, in my garden, successful in my work, happy in my marriage to a man who sees me clearly and loves what he sees. It's a good ending, the kind that satisfies because justice feels like it's been served, because growth has been achieved, because the heroine has claimed her power and used it wisely. But life isn't a story, and people aren't characters who exist to teach us lessons or provide closure. Last month, he found me, not through detective work or dramatic gestures, but through the mundane intersection of professional success and digital footprints. My company had been featured in a national magazine, complete with photos and a detailed profile. I'd been careful for years. But success has a way of making you visible whether you want to be or not. The letter arrived at my office on a Tuesday. My assistant brought it with the rest of the mail, and I recognized the handwriting immediately. After all these years, it was still the same careful script he'd used for love notes and grocery lists, and the occasional apology that never quite admitted fault. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my desk for 3 days while I went about my life. Meetings, conference calls, dinner with Ethan, morning runs through our neighborhood. Normal life, the kind I'd built deliberately and protected fiercely. Finally, on Friday evening, I opened it. It was 12 pages long, written on expensive stationery. His handwriting had gotten shakier over the years, but the words were still precisely chosen, still calculated for maximum impact. He told me about the decade he'd spent searching for me, the private investigators he'd hired, the sleepless nights, wondering where I'd gone. He described his life in careful detail, the successful career, the beautiful apartment, the awards and accolades, all hollow, he said, without me to share them with. He'd kept the letters he wrote, read them every day for 10 years, memorized every word, analyzed every sentence, tried to decode the message he was sure I'd hidden between the lines. He understood now, he said, understood what he'd done wrong, how he'd failed me, how he could do better. He'd learned, he claimed, grown, changed. He was ready now to love me properly, the way I deserved to be loved. The letter ended with a proposal, not of marriage. He was too smart for that, but of reunion, coffee, he suggested. One conversation, a chance to show me who he'd become, to prove that the man who'd lost me was not the man who was writing to me now. He'd enclosed a photograph, himself at 28, standing in what looked like a therapist's office, holding up one of my letters like a diploma. His smile was different, softer, more uncertain. He looked like someone who'd spent years learning to be vulnerable on command. I read the letter twice, then called Ethan. He found me. I said when he answered, "Are you all right?" "I think so, but I need to come home." He was waiting for me when I got there. sitting on our front porch with 2 cups of tea and the kind of patience that comes from loving someone completely. I handed him the letter and watched his face as he read it. Well, he said when he finished, he's learned to perform growth as skillfully as he once performed charm. You see it too. Oh, sweetheart. This whole letter is just a more sophisticated version of the same song. I've changed. You've changed me. I deserve another chance because I've suffered. It's manipulation with a therapy vocabulary. I felt something inside me relax. For a moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. If maybe he really had learned, really had grown. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. I thought about it for a long time. About the girl I'd been, who would have felt obligated to give him credit for trying. About the woman I'd become, who understood that my healing didn't require me to witness his. Nothing. I said finally, I'm going to do absolutely nothing. And that's what I did. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't acknowledge that I'd received it. I simply let it disappear into the silence I built around the life he'd never been part of. A month later, another letter arrived. Then another. Each one more desperate than the last, full of increasingly elaborate promises and explanations. He'd started therapy. He wrote. He'd read books about emotional abuse, about healthy relationships, about how to love someone without possessing them. He understood now. He claimed. Really understood. But understanding, I learned, was not the same as changing. And even if he had changed, really, genuinely transformed himself into someone capable of love without ownership, it wouldn't matter. Because I wasn't the same person who needed his growth in order to heal. The letters kept coming. 6 months then. A year. Sometimes weeks would pass between them. And I'd think maybe he'd finally accepted my silence. Then another envelope would appear, thick with pages of carefully crafted vulnerability. He'd hired another private investigator. He admitted in one letter, not to find me. He already knew where I was, but to learn about my life. He knew. About Ethan, about our marriage, about the success of my company. He knew I was happy. I'm not trying to take you away from your life. He wrote, I just need you to know that I understand now, that the man who hurt you is gone, that if I could go back and do everything differently, I would. But that was the thing he never understood. I didn't want him to go back and do everything differently. I didn't want him to become someone capable of loving me properly. I wanted him to leave me alone. The final letter arrived 2 years after. The first one, it was different from the others, shorter. Handwritten on plain paper instead of expensive stationery. His handwriting was worse, shaky in places, and there were stains on the paper that might have been tears. I'm dying. It began. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. He'd spent 2 years trying to become worthy of my forgiveness, he wrote. 2 years in therapy, reading books, practicing vulnerability, learning to sit with discomfort instead of trying to control it away. He dated other women, tried to love them properly, failed every time because he couldn't stop comparing them to his memory of me. I know you won't come to me, he wrote. I know I don't deserve your presence of my deathbed, your forgiveness for my failures, your absolution for the ways I broke you. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I took from you. Not just your dreams or your voice or your independence. I took your faith in love itself. I taught you that being loved meant disappearing. I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. The letter ended with a single sentence. I hope he sees you the way I should have. I cried when I read it. Not for him, but for the girl I'd been, who'd spent so many years believing that love was supposed to hurt. For the woman I'd become, who'd had to learn that healing sometimes looks like silence. For all the women who'd loved men who confused possession with devotion, who'd spent lifetimes making themselves smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of love. I never responded to that letter either. He died for months later. I know because The obituary was sent to me by the same classmate who'd first told me about his decade of waiting. "Thought you should know," she wrote. "He never got over you." But that wasn't quite right. He'd never gotten over the idea of me, the woman he'd imagined I could become if only he could find the right combination of pressure and patience. He'd spent 28 years, across 2 lifetimes, mourning a person who'd never actually existed. I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't send flowers or a sympathy card. I didn't reach out to his family or write a letter about the good times we'd shared. I did what I'd been doing for 12 years. Nothing. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to be the person they need you to be in order to feel better about themselves. That evening, Ethan and I sat in our garden as the sun set behind the mountains. He didn't ask how I felt about the news, didn't try to process my grief or celebrate my freedom. He just sat beside me, solid and present, the way he'd done for 7 years of marriage and 10 years of friendship. Before that, "Are you all right?" he asked finally. "I think so," I said. "I feel sad, but not guilty, not responsible. Just sad that he spent so much time trying to become someone worthy of a love that was never going to be offered again. You couldn't have saved him from that choice," Ethan said. "I know, but I wish he could have saved himself." Later that night, I dreamed about my letters again. But this time, they weren't the ones I'd written to him and to my younger self. These were different letters, ones I'd never written, to people I'd never met. Women who were where I'd been, making themselves smaller every day in service of someone else's comfort. Men who were where he'd been, confusing control with care in the dream. The letters scattered like leaves in wind, finding their way to anyone who needed to read them. And each one said the same thing: you are not responsible for teaching someone how to love you properly. You are not required to shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's brokenness. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to be free. I woke up feeling something I'd never felt before. Not just peace with my own choices, but hope for all the people still learning to make them. Today marks 15 years since I gave him those letters and walked away. 15 years of building a life that belongs entirely to me. Of loving and being loved without losing myself in the process. My company now operates in 12 countries, turning electronic waste into solar panels, giving broken things new purpose. Ethan and I have a daughter now, bright and stubborn and entirely herself. I watch her navigate the world with confidence I had to learn at 73. And I know that something fundamental has shifted in the pattern of things. She will not spend decades learning that her voice is too loud. She will not make herself smaller to make others comfortable. She will not confuse sacrifice with love or silence with peace. Because she is growing up in a house where love means being seen clearly and valued completely. Where disagreement doesn't mean abandonment. Where someone else's comfort is never more important than her own truth. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd responded to his letters. If I'd agreed to that coffee, given him the chance to show me how he changed, allowed him to demonstrate his growth. Maybe he would have been different. Maybe he really had learned to love without consuming, to care without controlling. But it wouldn't have mattered, because the woman who might have been impressed by his transformation, grateful for his effort, willing to give him credit for trying, she died in a bathroom mirror 57 years ago. The woman I became in her place had no use for men who needed to be taught how to treat her with basic respect. No time for relationships that required her to be smaller in order to work. No interest in love that came with conditions and contracts and carefully maintained performance. I think that's what he never understood in either lifetime. That growth and change and learning are beautiful things, but they don't entitle you to forgiveness from the people you've hurt. That becoming a better person doesn't mean the people you damage while becoming yourself owe you recognition, or absolution, or another chance. The most radical thing I ever did was nothing. No dramatic confrontation. No angry speech. No detailed explanation of his failures. Just silence. Just absence. Just the simple, revolutionary act of choosing myself over his need to be chosen. And in that nothing, I found everything I'd been looking for. The sun is setting now over our garden, and I can hear my daughter laughing with Ethan as they plant tomatoes in neat rows. Tomorrow I fly to Geneva for a climate summit, where I'll present research on closed-loop recycling systems. Next month, we're taking a family trip to New Zealand, where I'll be consulting on a waste-to-energy project. My life is full of small purposes and quiet joys, of work that matters and love that nourishes. It's not a perfect life. No life is, but it's mine. Completely, unapologetically, irreversibly mine. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life ends, I hope there's a girl standing at a crossroads, holding to maps. I hope she chooses the path that disappears into forest. I hope she learns sooner than I did that some cages are built from golden promises, that some prisons are constructed from someone else's dreams of who you could become. I hope she learns that love isn't supposed to cost you yourself, that the right person will love you more, not less, for taking up space in the world, that your voice is not too loud, your dreams not too big, your needs not too much. I hope she learns that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. This is my story. This is how I learned to choose myself. This is what rebirth really means. Not getting a second chance to make the same mistakes, but getting the wisdom to make entirely different choices. This is how I learned that freedom isn't something you win or earn or fight for. It's something you choose again and again, every day, in the small spaces between what others want from you and what you know to be true about yourself. This is how I learned to be free. The letters are still out there somewhere, I suppose. In an estate sale box, maybe, or buried in some relative's attic. Two pieces of paper that contain more truth than 50 years of marriage ever did. I wonder sometimes who will find them, what they'll make of words written by a ghost to her own past. But it doesn't matter anymore. The letters served their purpose, not as messages to him, but as declarations to myself. The moment I wrote them, I stopped being the woman who needed his understanding to heal. I became someone else entirely. Someone who could love without losing herself. Who could forgive without forgetting. Who could choose peace over the intoxicating drama of trying to fix what was never meant to be whole. There's a photo on my desk now, taken last week at my daughter's school science fair. She's holding up a model of a water purification system she designed. Her face bright with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing your ideas matter. Behind her, barely visible in the background, is a poster about renewable energy. The same topic I'd been sketching in that coffee shop 30 years ago, when he'd called my dreams ambitious. Ambition. Such a small word to carry so much weight. In my first life, I learned to hear it as an insult. A gentle correction that meant I was reaching too high, wanting too much, forgetting my place. In this life, I wear it like armor. My daughter will grow up understanding that ambition is just another word for hope made manifest, for believing you can build something better than what exists. Sometimes young women write to me through my company's website. They've read articles about my work, about the girl who started with nothing but refused to stay there. They tell me about dreams they're afraid to pursue, about relationships that make them feel smaller, about the exhausting work of trying to be perfect for people who will never think they're enough. Their letters arrive like echoes of my former self. I love him, they write, but I feel like I'm disappearing. Or he says my career is important to me, but then gets upset when I work late. Or the one that breaks my heart every time. Maybe I'm just asking for too much. I write back to every single one, not with advice. Advice implies there's a right answer, a formula they can follow to avoid the mistakes I made. Instead, I tell them stories About the first time I said no and meant it. About learning the difference between compromise and capitulation. About the day I realized that being alone was infinitely better than being lonely in someone else's presence. I tell them about Sarah. Not the Sarah from college, but a different Sarah who wrote to me 3 years ago. She was 25, engaged to a man who loved her potential. He'd taken over planning their wedding, dismissing her preferences as impractical. He'd convinced her to quit her job so she could focus on becoming the kind of wife he deserved. She wrote to me at 2 in the morning, after another fight about her attitude problem. I know I should leave, she wrote. But what if he's right? What if I am too difficult? What if this is as good as love gets for someone like me? I wrote back immediately, told her about the woman I'd been, the woman who'd believed that love meant gratitude for being chosen, even when the choosing felt more like claiming. I told her that love or real love doesn't require you to audition for it continuously, that the right person doesn't fall in love with your potential. They fall in love with who you are right now, messy and complicated and beautifully, imperfectly. Humanly 6 months later, she wrote again. She'd called off the engagement. It was terrifying. She said, being alone after so many years of defining herself through someone else's needs. But it was also liberating. She'd started painting again, something she'd given up because it took too much time away from the relationship. She'd applied for graduate school. She'd remembered what it felt like to make decisions based on what she wanted, not what would keep someone else happy. I'm still scared, she wrote, but I'm scared of the right things now. I'm scared of settling for less than I deserve, not scared of wanting more than I should. That letter sits framed on my office wall, next to others like it. Reminders that the story I lived doesn't have to be the story they live. That patterns can be broken, cycles can be interrupted. That choosing yourself is contagious in the most beautiful way. But not every story has a happy ending. Not every woman finds the strength to walk away. I've gotten letters from women who've read my responses to others, who've written to tell me they wish they could be brave, but they can't. They have children, mortgages, families who wouldn't understand. They've been diminished for so long they're not sure there's enough of them left to build a life on. To them, I write different letters, gentler ones. I tell them that courage isn't always dramatic. That sometimes it's as simple as not apologizing for having an opinion, not laughing at jokes that aren't funny, not pretending to be happy when you're not. Small rebellions, tiny. Acts of self-preservation that keep the ember of who you are from going out completely. I tell them that healing isn't linear, that there's no timeline for finding yourself, that every small step toward authenticity matters. Even if they never leave, even if they spend their whole lives in relationships that diminish them, they can still plant seeds of something different for their daughters, their nieces. The young women watching how they move through the world dot change, I've learned, happens in waves across generations. The woman who stays but refuses to completely disappear raises a daughter who won't settle for crumbs of affection. The daughter who watches her mother swallow her dreams becomes the woman who refuses to do the same. We are all part of a longer story, a generational healing that happens one choice at a time. This is what I think about when people ask if I have regrets. Do I regret the years I lost in my first life? The dreams I abandoned, the voice I silenced, the woman I could have been if I'd chosen differently from the beginning? The answer is complicated. I regret the pain, certainly. I regret the decades of feeling like a stranger in my own life. I regret the example I set for my son in that first life, teaching him through my silence that women exist to serve. That love is something you earn through self-erasure. But I don't regret the journey itself, because everything I experienced, the manipulation, the gradual disappearance, the slow suffocation of self taught me to recognize these patterns in their earliest stages. It gave me the vocabulary to name what was happening to other women. It made me a better mother to my daughter, a better partner to Ethan, a better mentor to the young women who find their way to my door. My pain became my purpose. My breaking became my making. The woman I am now exists because of the woman I was then. Not in spite of her. There are moments, even now, when I catch glimpses of the woman I used to be. Yesterday, Ethan asked me what I wanted for dinner, a simple question that shouldn't require thought. But for just a second, I felt that old impulse to say whatever you want or I don't care. The automatic self-erasure that had been my default for so many years. I caught myself, smiled, and said I wanted Thai food from the place on 5th Street. Such a small thing, expressing a preference about dinner. But it's in these small moments that freedom lives, in the choice to have opinions and voice them, in the radical act of taking up space in your own life. My daughter watches these interactions with the unconscious absorption that children bring to everything. She sees a mother who expresses preferences, who disagrees with her father without the world ending, who pursues her own dreams alongside, supporting others' dreams. She's learning, without even knowing it, that relationships are partnerships between equals, not performances by one person for another's comfort. Last week, she came home upset because a boy in her class had told her she was too smart and that boys don't like girls who are smarter than them. I felt something fierce and protective rise in my chest, not just for her, but for every generation of girls who've been taught to dim their light to make others comfortable. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him that's his problem, not mine, she said, matter-of-factly, and that maybe he should try being smarter instead of expecting me to be dumber. I wanted to cry and cheer at the same time. This girl, this fierce, unapologetic girl who knows her worth so completely she doesn't even question it. She is everything I fought to become. She is the proof that cycles can be broken, that different choices create different daughters. But even as I celebrate her confidence, I worry about the world she's growing up in. The same messages that taught me to shrink are still everywhere, just packaged differently. Social media tells her she should be grateful for male attention, well, simultaneously perfect enough to deserve it. Pop culture feeds her stories about women who find their worth through romantic love, who are completed by the right man's choosing. I tried to inoculate her against these messages the way my mother might have tried to protect me from physical diseases. We talk about media literacy, about the difference between love and obsession in movies, about why so many stories end with weddings instead of showing what comes after. I want her to understand that the fairy tales she loves are beautiful fiction, not instruction manuals for real life. Real love, I tell her, doesn't rescue you from your life. It gives you the support to build the life you want. She nods with the wisdom of 11 years, already more grounded in her sense of self than I was at 25. But I know the real tests are coming. Middle school, high school, college. All the years when the world will try to teach her that her value comes from external validation, that her dreams should be negotiable. That love requires sacrifice of self. I can't protect her from those messages entirely, but I can model something different. I can show her what it looks like to be a woman who loves and is loved without losing herself. I can demonstrate that it's possible to be kind without being compliant, to be loving without being self-erasing, to be in relationship without being consumed by it. Sometimes I think about the son I had in my first life, Ryan, who barely spoke to me by the end, who'd learned from watching his father that women existed to serve men's needs. I wonder what kind of man he became, whether he repeated the patterns he'd observed or somehow broke free of them. I hope, wherever he is in whatever timeline he exists in, that he learned to love better than his father did. The thought doesn't torment me the way it once might have. There's a peace in accepting that we can only control our own choices, our own growth, our own response to the patterns we inherited. I couldn't save Ryan from the lessons his father taught him, just as I couldn't save his father from the lessons his father had taught him. All I could do was remove myself from the equation, stop enabling the dysfunction by refusing to participate in it. This is something the women who write to me struggle with, the guilt of walking away from people who need them, The fear that leaving means they're selfish, cruel, abandoning someone who depends on them. I understand this guilt intimately. It kept me trapped for decades in my first life. The belief that my suffering was the price of someone else's comfort. That my disappearance was a gift I owed to their happiness. But I've learned something liberating in this life. You cannot save someone from themselves. You cannot love someone into being different than they are. You cannot sacrifice yourself into fixing what's broken in another person. All you can do is choose not to enable the brokenness. Choose not to subsidize someone else's dysfunction with your own well-being. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. It makes you someone who understands that real love, the kind that actually helps people grow, sometimes requires difficult boundaries. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behaviors by absorbing the consequences of those behaviors yourself. I think about this every time I get a letter from a woman asking if she's wrong to want to leave a relationship. That's slowly killing her spirit. I want to reach through the computer screen and shake her gently. Tell her that wanting to be happy isn't selfish, that protecting your own well-being isn't cruel, that choosing yourself isn't abandonment, it's survival. But I can't shake anyone into freedom. Freedom is something each person has to choose for themselves, in their own time, in their own way. All I can do is tell my story and hope it plants seeds of possibility in women who didn't know that leaving was an option, that choosing yourself was permitted, that there was life, good life, happy life on the other side of courage. The rain has stopped completely now, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Through my office window, I can see the first hints of sunset painting the mountains gold. And beyond them, the city I've made my home for 15 years. It's a small city, the kind where people know each other's stories, where success is measured not just in money, but in contribution, where a woman can build a business and raise a family without having to choose between them. This isn't the life I imagined at 18. In either iteration of that age, back then, I thought happiness would look like being chosen by the right person, being loved enough to feel complete. I thought fulfillment would come from being needed, from being someone's everything, from mattering so much to another person that my own dreams seemed insignificant by comparison. I was wrong about almost everything. Happiness, I've learned, looks like waking up and not immediately calculating someone else's mood to determine how your day will go. It looks like making decisions based on what feels right to you, not what will keep someone else comfortable. It looks like loving people without losing yourself in them, like being generous without being self-erasing, like caring deeply while maintaining the boundaries that keep you whole. Fulfillment doesn't come from being someone's everything. It comes from being your own something, complete in yourself, whole in your own right. Valuable not because of what you provide others, but because of who you are when nobody is watching. The sun is setting in earnest now, and I can hear cars pulling into driveways up and down the street as people return home from work, from school, from the daily business of building lives they actually want to live. This is the golden hour, the time when ordinary light becomes extraordinary, when everything looks touched by magic even though nothing has actually changed, except the angle of illumination. Maybe that's what rebirth really is, not a magical transformation, but a shift in the angle from which you see your own life, a change in illumination that reveals possibilities that were always there, dreams that were never actually impossible, just temporarily obscured by someone else's definition of what your life should look like. In a few minutes, I'll pack up my work and drive home to the house Ethan and I bought 3 years ago. The one with the big kitchen where we cook together, and the greenhouse where he grows vegetables year-round, and the reading nook where our daughter curls up with books about girls who save themselves. I'll ask about their days and tell them about mine, and we'll disagree about something trivial and resolve it without anyone having to disappear in the process. This is what love looks like when nobody has to earn it, when nobody has to audition for it, when it's given freely to people who are seen clearly and cherished exactly as they are. Tonight, after dinner, I'll probably work on my latest project, a partnership with schools to teach children about environmental sustainability through hands-on recycling programs. The grant proposal is due next week, and if we get it, we'll be able to reach thousands of kids with the message that broken things aren't worthless things, that with the right approach, almost anything can be given new life and purpose. It's fitting work for someone who's lived two lives, who knows firsthand what it means to be transformed not through someone else's vision, but through your own determination to become who you were always meant to be. Every day, I work with materials that others have discarded, finding value in what's been overlooked, creating something beautiful from what was considered waste. This is what I do professionally, but it's also what I did personally. Took the discarded parts of myself, the dreams that had been dismissed as impractical, the voice that had been deemed too loud, the ambitions that had been called unrealistic, and built something beautiful from them. Built a life that honors who I am, instead of hiding it. Built a love that celebrates my fullness instead of requiring my emptiness. But mostly, I tell them what I wish someone had told me at 18. You are not a rough draft of yourself, waiting for someone else to edit you into a final version. You are not a broken thing that needs to be fixed by the right love. You are not too much or too loud or too complicated. You are exactly enough, exactly as you are right now. And if someone can't love you without trying to change you, they don't love you at all. They love their idea of who you could become, which isn't love, it's a business transaction. Real love sees you as you are and says yes to all of it. Your dreams, your opinions, your complicated emotions, your refusal to make yourself smaller for anyone's comfort. This is the message I wish I could broadcast to every woman who's ever wondered if she's asking for too much by wanting to be loved as herself instead of as someone's project. You're not asking for too much. You're asking for what everyone deserves, to be seen, valued, and cherished for who you actually are, not who you might become if properly managed. The difference between these two kinds of love is the difference between prison and freedom, between performance and authenticity, between surviving and thriving. One asks you to shrink until you fit inside someone else's comfort zone. The other gives you room to expand into the fullness of who you're meant to be. My daughter will be home from school soon, full of stories about her day, her friends, her plans for changing the world one invention at a time. Ethan will arrive not long after, carrying takeout from the Thai place we love and the kind of easy affection that comes from 15 years of choosing each other every day. This is what happiness looks like, I've learned. Not the desperate joy of someone who's finally gotten what they always wanted, but the quiet contentment of someone who's built a life that fits. No drama, no grand gestures, no epic love story that requires someone to save or be saved. Just ordinary love, daily chosen, freely given, completely reciprocated. I think about that bathroom mirror sometimes, the one where I first saw myself clearly at 73. The woman looking back at me now is different, not because she's younger, but because she knows something that women never learned, that love is not supposed to cost you yourself. The woman in that mirror had spent decades trying to earn love by erasing herself piece by piece, until nothing remained but an echo of who she might have been. The woman I am now understands that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to audition for it. It doesn't ask you to prove your worthiness by sacrificing your dreams. It doesn't demand you become smaller so someone else can. Feel bigger. Real love sees you completely and loves what it sees. It encourages your growth, celebrates your success, supports your dreams, not because those things serve its needs, but because your happiness matters. Real love doesn't try to fix you or improve you or shape you into a more convenient version of yourself. It loves you as you are while supporting who you're becoming. I learned this too late in one life and just in time in another. But maybe that's how these things work. Maybe we're all given exactly the lessons we need, in exactly the order we can handle them. Maybe some of us have to learn to love ourselves the hard way, by first experiencing what it feels like to lose ourselves completely. The rain is stopping now. Through my office window, I can see the first hints of sunset painting the mountains gold. In a few hours, I'll be home, helping my daughter with homework while Ethan makes dinner and tells us about his day. We'll argue, probably about something small and inconsequential. The difference is in our house. Disagreement doesn't mean someone has to win and someone has to disappear. It just means we're two different people who've chosen to build a life together anyway. This is the end of my story, but it's also the beginning. Every day I wake up and choose this life again. Choose kindness over control, growth over stagnation, presence over performance. Choose to love and be loved without losing myself in the process. And somewhere out there, other women are making their own choices. Some are walking away from relationships that diminish them. Some are pursuing dreams they've been told are too ambitious. Some are learning to say no, to take up space, to believe they deserve better than the scraps of affection they've been accepting. This is for them. This is my letter to every woman who's ever made herself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Every woman who's swallowed her dreams to feed someone else's ego. Every woman who's apologized for wanting things, for taking up space, for existing as fully and completely as she was meant to. You are not too much. Your dreams are not too big. Your voice is not too loud. You do not exist to make other people comfortable with your smallness. You do not owe anyone your disappearance in exchange for their love. You are allowed to want things. You are allowed to pursue them. You are allowed to fail and try again and fail better. You are allowed to change your mind, to grow beyond who you were, to become someone your younger self couldn't have imagined. You are allowed to leave relationships that require you to betray yourself to maintain them. You are allowed to walk away from people who love their idea of you more than they love your reality. You are allowed to choose yourself again and again, until choosing yourself becomes as natural as breathing. This is what I learned in 73 years of one life and 30 years of another. Freedom isn't something you fight for once and then possess forever. It's something you choose every day, in small moments and large ones. It's saying no when you mean no. It's pursuing your dreams, even when people call them ambitious. It's refusing to make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. It's understanding that the right love will never ask you to disappear. It will ask you to show up, fully and completely, as exactly who you are. And then it will love that person. Not the person you could become, not the person you used to be, but the person you are right now. In this moment, with all your flaws and dreams and complicated humanity. This is my story. This is how I learned to choose myself. This is how I discovered that the most radical thing a woman can do is exist fully in a world that profits from her smallness. This is how I learned that love is not supposed to hurt, that healing is possible, that it's never too late to choose yourself in this life or any other. This is how I learned to be free. And freedom, I've discovered, is not a destination you arrive at once and then inhabit forever. It's a daily practice, a moment-by-moment choice, a way of moving through the world that says, I matter. My dreams matter. My voice matters. I am worth loving exactly as I am. The sun has set now. My family is home. My daughter is calling my name, excited to show me something she learned today. Ethan is in the kitchen, humming something off-key and beautiful. This is my life, not perfect, but mine, not dramatic, but deeply, quietly happy. This is what happens when you choose yourself. This is what waits on the other side of courage. This is the life you get to build when you stop trying to earn love and start expecting it freely given. This is how the story ends. Not with revenge or vindication or the satisfaction of seeing someone who hurt you finally understand their mistakes. It ends with an ordinary evening, an ordinary family, An ordinary woman who learned that she was never ordinary at all. It ends with choosing yourself again and again until choosing yourself becomes the most natural thing in the world. It ends with freedom, the quiet kind, the lasting kind, the kind that doesn't require anyone else's permission or understanding or approval. It ends with love, real love, the kind that sees you clearly and loves what it sees. The kind that makes you more yourself, not less. It ends with peace. The deep kind, the earned kind, the kind that comes from finally coming home to yourself. This is how my story ends. This is how it begins.